at the beginning of all this going on in March. I call it Dig Deep. Mother always cares, the child is always there in her heart. Take it as it comes, the earth's rising with the sun, and we are here. Dig deep, no fear, find the rock that holds you. Dig deep, we're here. The earth never once let you float away. No more looking back, the past is surely past. We are here. With the wind in your face, only keeping pace, standing still. Dig deep, no fear, find the rock that holds you. Dig deep, we're here. The earth never once let you float away. Love's at your center, you cannot fail. That's the illusion at the end of it all. Dig deep, no fear, find the rock that holds you. Dig deep, we're here. The earth never once let you float away. Dig deep, no fear, find the rock that holds you. Dig deep, we're here. The earth never once let you float away. So please join us in a spirit of meditation, reflection, or prayer as we deepen into our service and share our opening words by the Reverend Rod Richards. We who gather here in this tender and anxious and confusing time, we have been awash in a sea of information and misinformation and disinformation. And this information that we seek is simply so that we may make wise decisions about how to respond and learn how we hold one another when we can't hold one another, and decide how we can be when we can't be together. What is this face? What is this we face? How best do we respond? And why is this happening? The why, the why, the why, and why do those who suffer so, suffer most, always suffer? Suffer most from what we now face. Why? And what can we do for those who are most at risk, most vulnerable, all the time, and now and again? And how do we respond, and how do we hold one another when we can't hold one another? And how do we stay together and stick together and worship together when we can't be together? Yet we are. Here we are here together. So some Unitarian Universalists have a practice of the empty chair. I don't have mine pulled up, but it is in the room. It's becoming one of our regular practices, as it is especially apropos in a time of virtual gathering. The chair represents people who are with us in spirit, but not physically in the room. Often the chair is held for those who have died or cannot physically join us, or just people who are in our hearts, but not present. This morning, our chair is for George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and all the people of color killed by private people and state violence. We include this chair, mindful of the empty chairs in families and communities, and all the joys and sorrows the murdered will never have. We also include all those who have died in the pandemic. We join Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists all over the world this morning in lighting our chalice, part of a body of people determined to bring light into the world. If you have your chalice ready to light, please feel free to turn on your video and share, and we will light our chalices now. We light our chalice this morning to remember we do not go to church, we are the church. We light our chalice in gratitude for the gathered light this morning. This morning, I'd like to share a reading from the Society of Friends author, Parker Palmer. You'd all catch me on that one. I can't breathe. Those words give voice to the terror that has haunted Black Americans since the founding of this country. They can also serve as a tragic tag for the political cultural era in which life has been choked out of so many and so much. I can't breathe were the dying words of a Black man named George Floyd as a police officer kept a knee on his neck for nearly 9 minutes while Floyd laid handcuffed on the ground. They are the words that thousands of lynching victims in this country might have said as they died. Words that freedom seekers now living in limbo south of our border could say as they watched their dreams and sometimes their children die. All of this is rooted in the racism that American leaders have long exploited as a path to power to which too many whites have given silent assent. I can't breathe might have been the dying words of the 100,000 plus American victims of COVID-19 just before they were intubated. Deaths that have hit communities of color the hardest. Fewer would have died if our leaders valued science above ideology, human life above money and power, and public interest above their own. Their knees were pressed down on those throats. I can't breathe represents a challenge to the moral credentials of white people if we fail to speak and act against the racist forces that help fuel number 45's war on democracy. Some of us have been gasping for breath since the birtherism huckster ran for president, polluting the air we breathe with his racism and his taste for fascism. In the wake of a horrifying week in America, what can we do? If you or I walked down the street and heard a stranger say, "I can't breathe," we'd dial 911. We'd stay with a stranger until help arrived, and do anything we could, the Heimlich maneuver, CPR, or hold a hand to hold. We would not walk on by as if nothing were happening. Please, let's not walk by now. And let's not indulge the self-serving delusion that there's nothing we can do. Alone or with your friends, study articles like 75 Things White People Can Do for Racial Justice and act on one or more of the suggestions. Use Facebook and other social media to let folks in your network know where you stand. Speak to family and friends who support racist words and actions, however indirectly. Tell them that you find it hard to breathe in that space, and then take a deep breath and tell them what you value. Speak the truth with love, but speak the truth. If you belong to a faith community whose leaders have ignored or even supported the inhumanity so evident in our politics right now, speak up. Tell them that you need to hear muscular love, truth, and justice preached and practiced, not soothing piosity or faithless complicity. When November arrives, vote for the candidates who offer something better than the tragedy we're living right now. There's much we can do. It starts with listening to all who are crying, "I can't breathe." Souls, theirs, ours, and our country's depend on us hearing and responding in every way we can.
We are building a new way. We are building stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the key. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without peace, this world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
Professor Heather Cox Richardson, a political historian who teaches at Boston College, publishes her thoughts almost every day about what is going on in the news, and then she contextualizes it in terms of history and significance. I feel about 10 times smarter since I started reading her work. I want to read you part of what she wrote on Friday because I think it's a good way to frame our conversation this morning. She began with a quote by Antonio Gramsci. "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." She continues, "America feels completely chaotic today. Protesters are marching in major cities, sometimes looting. Police appear to be attacking them, and the journalists covering the protest. Rather than calming the situation, the president has thrown gasoline on the fire, which escalated yesterday's fight with Twitter. Trump launched a blistering verbal attack on China and announced that the United States is withdrawing from the World Health Organization in the midst of a deadly pandemic. Meanwhile, new information suggests that the Trump administration did indeed collude with Russia. George Floyd is dead. So is Breonna Taylor, and so are more than 100,000 victims of a deadly pandemic. The news is overwhelming. It is designed to be overwhelming. This sort of chaos and confusion destabilizes society. In that confusion, as tempers run hot, people who are desperate for certainty return to old patterns and divide along traditional lines. Many are willing to accept a strong leader who promises to restore order, or simply are so distracted and discouraged, they stop caring about what their leaders do. They simply hunker down and try to survive. From there, she talks about various things happening in the news and puts them into a larger narrative. And then she concludes the piece like this. I started out tonight by noting that this chaotic onslaught of news is designed to divide Americans and make us fall back into old animosities in order either to get us to accept a strong leader or to exhaust us until we quit caring what happens. In either case, American democracy is over. But there's another possibility. Chaos does not have to destroy us. The leaders creating it are doing so precisely because they know they are not in control. And the same uncertainty they are trying to leverage can just as easily be used by their opponents. At this crazy, frightening, chaotic moment, it is possible to reach across old lines and create new alliances, to re-emphasize that most Americans really do share the same value of economic fairness and equality before the law, and to rebuild a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The old world is certainly dying, but the shape of the new world struggling to be born is not yet determined. So here it is, a few days later, and there is more chaos and more fear in the news. As always, there are conflicting stories. It can be so hard to discern what is true right now, and I suspect that that too is part of the effort to paralyze us. I'll tell you that until about 6 o'clock last night, I was just trying to tweak the sermon I was going to give today about idolatry and make it work. I hope I will preach that sermon at a later date if the world can just stop dramatically changing every 24 hours. All the time I worked on it, about 4 hours, I knew I was breaking a cardinal rule of sermon writing. Ministers are reminded over and over to just give one sermon every Sunday, and I was definitely trying to sneak in a second sermon without having to start over. And I was doing this because it had been a long week. I had a headache and I wasn't feeling well. Personally, globally, and within the congregation, there's so much going on. I knew I had no answers, no way to make the murder of another Black person by the police okay. I had no magic solutions for what we should do now. In short, I was tired and overwhelmed. The effort to wear us down was, at least in my case, working well. I'm well aware that many of you are struggling in your personal lives as well. We are human and frail, and there is always a lot going on. I have on occasion written my representatives to exhort them to do their jobs because I had my own jobs and I didn't have time to do theirs as well. Life is hard and we are being asked to care about a lot of things right now, even as we struggle with our own challenges. The death of a restrained, unarmed Black man is not a new thing. It is a horrifically common event. But George Floyd lived not too far from here. And we are used to thinking of Minneapolis as a fairly liberal city full of kind and good people. I think George Floyd's death just felt a little more real for us due to the proximity. And in this congregation, we have been digging into systemic racism for a while now. And I hope that we have all educated ourselves to the point that we know that state-sanctioned killing of Indigenous people and people of color, killing without repercussions, is an old story in America. So while I hope we were not caught by surprise, I know we are feeling it deeply. And I can only imagine what it feels like right now for people of color and Indigenous people. More and more behaviors are going out for a jog or picking up trash outside your dormitory for your work-study job, or asking someone to leash their dog, or going to sleep in your apartment are turning out to be high-risk behaviors. How must it feel to know you could be killed at any time for the crime of exercising or sleeping? If white people are overwhelmed and worn down by the news, imagine how it feels for the people not allowed to breathe. I don't have any suggestions for things we should run out and do right now. No words of wisdom for how to take this all in and birth something better. But let me share a few things that are helping me right now. I'm holding out hope for November. Your fellow congregant, Thelma, said something to me the other day, and I asked for it and received permission to share it. She said, "Trump has given me a reason to live until November." I would encourage you to vote your conscience and make sure everyone you know is also voting. A lot hangs in the balance. I'm also being mindful when I read the news to check to see if I too am being manipulated. Are seeds of division and hate finding fertile ground in my mind? One of the things I love about Richardson's writing is she helps me to keep my eye on the ball and not to be distracted by political theater. If we obsess on stupid things people say or on fringe movements that show up to protest with semi-automatic weapons but no masks, or on whatever latest outrage is presented for our daily consumption, we risk missing the really diabolical things that are happening to dismantle democracy and to make this planet unfit to live on. All that theater takes a huge emotional toll, as it is designed to do. I find I am less willing to participate in the theater of the absurd now that I am aware of it. I also think a lot about imagination, or the lack thereof. I remember seeing a movie called Avatar, and I don't remember the plot anymore. But if memory serves at all, humans were on a planet with a species far more advanced than they were. Naturally, there was a conflict because every story requires a conflict. In the end, it was solved with male ego and violence. I remember most leaving the theater disgusted. It was as if we could not imagine, not even in the future or on an alien planet or in an imaginary movie, a better way of being. As we face this liminal time, I think a failure of imagination is catastrophic. We have to imagine something better if we want to live into it. I knew a person who belonged to a science fiction book group. Their purpose in reading these books was to engage with people who were imagining something better. What better things can you imagine? I think about being a non-anxious presence in an anxious world. In our service 2 weeks ago, we had a reading from the Buddhist Jack Kornfield. He ended saying, "Remember the story Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh told of the crowded refugee boats. If even one person on the boat stayed calm, it was enough. It showed the way for everyone to survive." It is our inner nobility and steadiness that we must call upon in our personal and collective difficulties. So in other words, keep calm and carry on. I've been preaching on spiritual practice and religious grounding a lot in my tenure here for just such times as these. If we know in our bones what our bedrock values are and where we ground our lives, perhaps we can be the ones staying calm. Perhaps collectively, we can show the way for everyone to survive. And it needs to be collective. Individual and individualistic spirituality isn't going to be enough. We need community. We need religion. We need this because alone we will just be run over, and we don't have all the wisdom. We need this because alone we have days where all we can do is rock in the corner and call it good. Alone we will have days when our grief is our only emotion, or fear, or anger, or anxiety. But collectively, we can be more powerful and we can cover for each other. We can imagine something greater than our parts. I also find silence is helping me. I'm spending a lot of time outside. It isn't precisely quiet. Life goes on. It is spring. A lot of animals are trying to be noticed right now for a chance to continue the species. But it is its own thing, and I pay attention as hard as I can. And what becomes silent is my monkey mind, and that is a blessing. I would like to invite you into 1 minute of silence right now, right in the middle of a sermon, because why not? We could all use a minute of peace. I'm also finding that acknowledging my white privilege and being more educated about racial divides is helping me a lot. No more mental gymnastics of justification. So much easier to face the truth and feel the feels and be ready to serve in whatever ways I am asked or I can find. So much easier to hear the subtle racism in the comments coming out of Minnesota. Maybe just practice letting go of the but. I am not racist, but maybe replace it with, I don't want to be racist, so I am listening. So I am opening myself to learning. So I am opening myself to serve. So I am imagining a better way. So take a deep breath. Let your heart be broken by all the sorrow of the world right now, but do not drown in it. Find your grounding. Open your ears. Share what you know. We will stay after the service for a meeting of all of us. We will talk about such mundane things as infrastructure. And we will talk about what this fellowship needs to do to survive and thrive. We will talk about what matters most to us, what matters so much that we will live for it. We will do all this because the stakes are high, because every so many years, Shiva destroys the world so something new can be born. I don't think any of us are keen on the world that forces of chaos are trying to bring to bear. And isn't it wonderfully fortuitous that the interim period of this congregation coincides with the rebirth of the world? We will have such an expansive slate to create on as we decide where this congregation is heading. I've come to think of calling not in terms of what God is calling us to do, but what are our covenants calling us to do? What are our relatives on this interdependent web of life calling us to do? So do not be duped into despair or panic or immobility. Go to the places that ground you. Go to what you know is good, really good. Turn to one another. Dig deep to find that muscular love, truth, justice. Preach it and practice it. It starts with listening to all who are crying, I can't breathe. Souls, theirs, ours, and our country's depend on hearing and responding in every way we can. May it be so.
Wish I knew how it would feel to be free. Wish I could break all these chains holding me. Wish I could say